Welcome to Stageworthy. I'm Phil Rickaby, the host of this podcast. This is episode 319. Stageworthy is a one-person operation, so not only do I do the interviews, I also arrange the guests, edit the show, promote it, and I also created the music. I also shoulder all of the financial responsibilities for keeping the show going. So if you enjoy this podcast, please consider supporting it. There are a few ways that you can do that. If you listen on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, you can leave a rating. And if you listen on Apple Podcasts, you can also leave a review. If you want to keep up with what's going on with Stageworthy and my other projects, you can subscribe to my newsletter by going to philrickaby.com/subscribe. And you can also leave a tip for the show by dropping some change in the virtual tip jar. I will put a link to that in the show notes, which you can find on the website or on your podcast app. But one of the most important things that you can do, even more important than rating or leaving a review or even financial support, is to share it on social media. Even a retweet will help. You can find Stageworthy on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at StageworthyPod, and you can find the website with the archive of all 319 episodes at StageworthyPodcast.com. And if you want to find me, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Phil Rickaby, and as I mentioned, my website is philrickaby.com. My guest this week is Daniel Levinson. Daniel is the founder of Canada's oldest stage combat school, Rapier Wit. He's also been performing, directing, and teaching stage combat professionally since 1991 and is a fight master with Fight Directors Canada. He's created fights for companies such as the Stratford Festival, Canadian Stage, Second City, Factory Theatre, and so many more. Here's our conversation. Have you guys been doing gun classes?
Finally got things up and running again, and I'm pleased to say that, that's what happened.
Nice. That's good. So you guys are finally doing classes in person. Have you had opportunities during the pandemic to sort of like come back into the room and then had to shut down, or have you been like shut down and only recently got started going again?
I had the tiniest of window in November, where I basically did a couple things. This is not including me being lucky enough to be on set, right? Or to do some Zoom work, of course, but to actually be in person with people. So we did a couple things in November, but almost immediately we had to shut down because, of course, the new greatest and tastiest of COVID hit again. So I was stuck with it. And both my wife and business partner, Kirsten, and I had a lot of discussions about this. And since our mantra is about safety, it would be pretty inappropriate for me to just sort of, I don't care about people's safety and open anyway, no matter how much I desperately missed people.
Right, of course. Did you guys do classes, did you do Zoom classes? I know it's hard to do stage combat over Zoom. So what did you guys do?
So I should say this. I have peers who did Zoom classes, and more power to them. I was thrilled for them that they would do that. But I got to be honest, it's not what I do. I feel my specialty about stage combat is really about partnering and sharing energy and the intimacy of being in a room together and the awareness of audience and all that kind of stuff. And so because of that, I held back. Now, I directed a show over Zoom. I helped other people through Zoom as a director or as a facilitator or even as a dramaturge. But the actual teaching of classes, I did a couple things and it was more of demonstrations, and it just didn't feel stellar. It didn't feel as honest that I wanted Daniel to be, as it were. So I held back. And otherwise, I was on set for some film work, which was really neat. And of course, we went through all the careful COVID safety measures, and masks and goggles, and so there was no messing around. But really, theater and of course the training of performers and and the engagement on that level really had to disappear for 2 years, and it was heartbreaking.
That is, I mean, it's bad enough that we haven't been able to really be in theaters and things like that. Especially, but when your passion is teaching, and teaching sort of requires that you're in a room together, that's a really hard thing to give up. I hope that you were able to keep busy enough that you didn't feel it quite so much.
I will say that time there were moments. Let's say the time felt heavy in my hands. I will not lie, and the funny thing is that Kirsten and I had a ton to do physically at the Wit to upgrade and deal with things, and we thought all we needed was time. We are liars who lie, because clearly it wasn't time we needed, because we didn't do it. So that's embarrassing as heck. Oh my God. When you were saying about not being able to be in the space, is the other thing that I realized. If we were having this conversation back in 2019, and you said that you asked me what did I think the future would hold for what we do at Rapier Wit, I was really looking at people's engagement in a different way in the work. And what I mean by that is, we'll always, I hope, always get performers and artists who want to understand what it is to be a performer on a physical level and come to us for that. But I was also having people, we're talking lawyers and doctors and people who really wanted to have some fun on the floor in a safe way, but basically be able to invest themselves in this really, really neat partnering with weapons thing. And I felt that as much as people were enjoying interacting on the internet with video games and group games, I really thought a major part of our future was going to be people coming together in person, learning new skills and being like a team and that sort of sharing, regardless of if they were using it for profession or not. And COVID threw obviously a monkey wrench in that, but I'm hoping as things really start to open up, because I feel like it's a fool's errand right now to claim we're out of COVID, like we're on the other side of it. I just, I don't believe it.
Right.
Yeah. But, I'm hoping that will happen, not because I'm not super keen at working with professionals at the highest level, because that's such a gift, but there's something about working with people who are doing it for sheer pleasure, what they bring to the room. It's remarkable. Now,
were you surprised that there were groups that wanted to do stage combat as sort of team building, or was that something that you thought that you went out to sort of try to find people who wanted to do that?
I certainly didn't chase it, because where we, and ironically, we just recently got called from someone asking if we do that, and of course we did it. But in a way, when it's structured that way, and it's an organization and a group of people who know each other from work, there's sometimes some embarrassment, some ego. Like, we've had a lot of fun, but also it's like, this is a chance to get together, eat and drink on the corporation's dime kind of thing. And so they want to, let's get through this thing so we can do the other thing, the partying part, which often was the case, And so, and I understood it. There was no hard feelings about it. No, I'm talking more along the lines of just individuals or small groups of friends joining in with the professionals. You know what I mean? And it's neat. And of course, we've had people who claim they're not actors because they haven't had classical actor training. But I'm here to tell you, their understanding of narrative, creating character, sharing empathy with an audience is profound. And so it comes back to my thinking often when I'm talking to people about, it's like singing, right? You'll hear people say, I can't sing. And it's like, oh no, you can't. Yeah. And the number of people I've actually met is practically zero who are truly tone deaf. And that's usually a mechanical issue within the ear versus, you may not like how your voice sounds. And to be fair, it's not that we want to listen to everyone sing. That sounds cruel, but you know what I mean? There's a reason why we cherish specific people that we have albums of, right? But acting is such a human thing, especially when we're talking at the foundational level of inventing yourself in a story or placing yourself in a story and finding yourself, reaching out to another and and sharing, let's call it social emotions. I mean, what is more human than that? And of course, it was religion for the Greeks, right? We know that theater was everywhere for the longest time, without it becoming sort of like, you can't see my hands, I'm doing little air quotes, classic theater that suddenly becomes like hard work theater, right? And of course, one of the things I think that COVID really showed was how much we need entertainment.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know about you, I have been watching a ton of streaming services, and really, really amazing things I probably never would have known about, from Korea, you know, from the Philippines, from, you know, like stuff that because we live in this remarkable time with Netflix and various other companies that can reach into areas across the world and bring them to a worldwide audience. Amazing, right? And it has inspired me to, you know, obviously think more about what I want to do when creating art.
You know, as you were talking about people who would come in and they'd say, I'm not an actor, but then they would turn out to have some chops. I think back to the fact that as children, we pretend naturally. Mm-hmm. And as children, we immerse ourselves in our make-believe worlds, in our imagination when we are playing.
Totally.
And then at some point, somebody says, well, that's enough of that. You have to stop doing that. That's not real. We stop it entirely.
Totally. I had an aunt who, I don't need to out her, but I used to run around as a little kid. And when my parents were away, I would stay with my aunt and uncle. And I used to sing all the time. I had sort of, I had engagement in that sort of joy of making noise, and she told me once, and I remember it like it was yesterday. It's like, I don't know why you sing. You have a terrible voice, and that pretty much successfully stopped me from singing for let's say 15 years. You get I find myself in university, and we have to sing because I was in an acting program, and they want us to, of course, explore all sorts of things. Or at the time, right? And one of them was, of course, singing. And there were some really good singers in my class when I was in university, like really, really good singers. And I felt like I shouldn't have even been there. And Kirsten, and more importantly, this sounds more important, it's funny. Kirsten's mother is a remarkably gifted pianist and loves hearing me sing and sing along with what she's playing. And it's just a funny thing. But I think, and this is a whole other conversation, but what you're talking about, us just stopping, it's unfortunate when someone decides you're an inconvenience or they just don't want to hear you at that moment, and they shut down major parts of your life.
It is a sad fact, because, you know, I can remember two instances, and I remember them so clearly, of things that shut down creativity. I remember I used to love painting when I was very young. And I remember I would paint all the time. And then I remember one time I showed the painting to someone and I said, isn't it amazing? I painted this lion. Isn't it amazing? And they said, it doesn't really look like a lion.
Thoughtless. Yeah. Just thoughtless.
And I stopped painting.
Yeah. And I mean, and let's be fair. The person might have intentionally meant to be cruel, but more likely than not, you caught them at a bad moment or a thoughtless moment. Right. And it certainly made me want to be sensitive without being disengaging from my responsibility as a teacher and a mentor. But it's made me sensitive to be mindful of how I say things. And I'm always working on it, right? Because you also want to be authentic. You don't want to sound like your that's what I meant, like by removing your obligations. Like everything's great, without without being honest about it. And people know, I think, when you're simply not being authentic. And it's funny, I was talking to a person in a different field who has to work with people with emotional challenges. And that idea of being able to tell someone that they need to redirect their focus or rethink or return to their work because it's not yet complete, or they haven't reached the successful outcome they were hoping for. And you want to do it in a way that acknowledges the work they've already done, especially when they've already done quite a bit of work, but at the same and encourage them, but at the same time, give really specific and useful feedback that will allow them to then grow, right? And hearing people say, "Oh, that was nice," at first sounds like nice, but it doesn't. It doesn't really explain what was good and what needs to be looked at, right? And so we're thinking about what is that, and of course we're also living in a time right now, I think, where we're expressing and looking at language differently, and there's a real interest in trying to step away from, let's say, the bad old days in all schemes. And at the same time, I would be a liar if I said there wasn't a tremendous amount that I want to maintain that was useful from past artistic thought or our previous endeavors, right? And so I'm a little afraid of throwing the baby out with the bathwater, as it were, you know? Yeah.
I remember I was working at, I think people often tell truth about something, especially where theater is concerned, without really realizing it. Some of I worked at one of the really large theaters in the city a number of years ago. And I worked as an usher, a few shows. And one of my shifts was at the door. So I would be sitting by the door or standing by the door as people were leaving. And I got to overhear the things that people say when they didn't really like the show. But
and probably weren't talking to someone in the show or involved with the show.
No. But they paid enough money that they feel like they should feel something about the show. Like they paid a lot of money for this show. They shouldn't hate the show, but they didn't really like it. And they would say bland things like, everybody did such a great job, which means nothing. But
no, it's true.
After a while, you start to realize this is people. You start to see the motivation behind it, and you realize, oh, that is actually a really harsh criticism. Yeah. Well, they're not saying they enjoyed this show. They're just commenting on what a great job people were doing.
And I think what you said is also justifying, it's not just treasure you spent, but time, right? And talk about your truly finite resource. You know what I mean? It's interesting you say that, because I'm also thinking of the other side of that coin, where I love being an audience. Right, in all sorts of ways, like all sorts of mediums. I love reading, and as I said, when we couldn't go out, Kirsten and I were watching a lot of really interesting programming. And also, we're talking. It doesn't all have to be fiction, right? There's some cool like cooking shows, and there's just and watching the art of how the really good produced things look, right? Like Chef's Table is an education in how to capture beauty and explore through sound and music, all the sensory concept of what's something you're supposed to be tasting, right? But I'm also fascinated when I'm talking about the other side of the coin is we can't have any nice things, right? And what I mean by that is there's people who claim to be fans who clearly hate everything.
Oh yes,
and that horrible struggle that I want something new, but it must be exactly what it was before.
Yes, but not too much exactly like it was before, because I will hate that too.
Oh my God. Yeah. And I will fully admit I'm totally a fan too. And again, we won't, unless you desperately want to talk about it, but there's some stuff that came out that is tremendously nostalgic because it's sequels to things that had a major impact when they first came out, because they were the first of things, and or not just the first of a series, but often they were stuff that changed how we looked at comedy or filmmaking, whatever it was, right? And it's really hard to capture lightning in the bottle again. And you're watching something afterwards, and it's funny, exactly what you just said. So Kirsten and I are sitting there, and there's this sort of, well, it wasn't what I really wanted. It's like, the ice cream truck is ringing and you run out into the street and you're super excited and they have vanilla. Vanilla can be really great, but this is sort of the low grade vanilla and you're like, it's hot out and it's still ice cream and I still liked it, but I kind of was hoping for sprinkles, right?
Yeah.
And I'm a bit embarrassed by it, right? I used to never leave off watching a show or a movie. I had optimism right to the end, even if I wasn't liking it, that it would have something better. Like you know what I mean? Like it was worth it. But COVID also sort of changed me in that like I could leave things. And and it didn't feel like a betrayal or something. That's kind of funny.
Well, it's interesting because now if you're watching, there are so many things that you could watch.
Oh my God, yeah.
Is it worth sticking with this thing? This is clearly terrible.
Yes.
And the chances of this being redeemed at the end for all of this terrible is very slim. So is it better just to turn it off and go on to something else? 100%. Or do I stick with it?
And so you're with you're talking with your friends and no doubt there's things that you all like together and you've watched, but I'm constantly making suggestions to other people and vice versa. It's physically impossible, especially with so many different streaming systems. So I'm going to pull out my walker and talk about the old days when I was a young man. There are people, like they had 3 channels, right? Like I remember you knew what you were going to watch, but you rushed home to get it. Like there's no way to record it. And if you missed it, you weren't going to see it. Right. And so there was a social experience about getting to school the next day to talk about it. Right. And
I can remember planning out. We would plan out our weeks with a TV guide. Right. Be like, OK, so we're going to watch this. We're going to watch this. But we would have to negotiate about what we're going to watch. If somebody's a hockey fan, there's a hockey game on at the same time. It's a thing. But if you missed it, you missed it.
And there were I distinctly remember when the first VCR came into my childhood home, and we're talking, it was like the top went like it came up like a missile launcher. Like it was hard. It was a machine, right? Versus digital, and you needed a slide rule. For those who aren't old enough to know what a slide rule is, look that up. There was a slide rule kind of thing. Like how do you manage to record, and you could mess it up and you could totally record something else by accident. And it's just really funny. That oh my God, this is totally going to get us to talk about something else. But that idea now, would you say, I'm going to put you, because you're reviewing, I'm going to ask you, would you say you have lost your endurance for patience because you can, to all intents and purposes, get whatever you want whenever you want it now, practically?
Oh, that is a tough question. Right?
Because the idea of having to wait. Now, there are some TV shows now that have returned to dropping them weekly versus they all come out, so you can't all stream them at once. Or the idea that films were coming out both in cinema and on demand, right? And so obviously we'll always have moments where you need to wait for things. But there was that thing I was saying that we had to, as you said, you planned out. It was like a military plan, right? Do this, this, and this. And that joke about, someone's watching the TV as you're racing to the bathroom or to the kitchen to grab a snack. It's on. Oh, yes. You dive across the room.
Yes. I can remember, there's a couple of things that I can remember. I remember which season it was of Star Trek: The Next Generation with Picard becoming one of the Borg and then having to wait.
Oh yes,
until the fall to see how that resolves. Like this show ends, it's like 20 something episodes. It ends in like the end of winter, early spring, and then you have to wait through the summer to find out what happens.
And there was a series called which was for visitors.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember that? Okay. And
I do.
And they had a huge ensemble cast. And they would just be killing people. Like someone went out for a coffee and got struck by a cab. Nothing to do with the science fiction or the monsters of the show. Right? It was like, oh my God. And it was like really disorienting that, you're invested in this character and all of a sudden it's like, well, that one's dead. And there were these shows like that really kind of threw you for a loop, and Yeah, I can't explain why that doesn't happen as much now. I think people maybe would lose their minds. Like I said, the fanboys like send angry letters.
I think that streaming has, because I think the value in streaming early on, like when Netflix was making its own shows, was we're dropping this whole thing and now you can binge it.
Yeah.
And you could sit down, you can watch this whole series in a weekend, whether it was Orange is the New Black or Stranger Things or whatever it was. You would watch the whole thing. And then that Monday you'd come back and you would, like, everybody would talk about it.
Totally.
Now, like, I think, like you mentioned, there are shows that are dropping episodes, or maybe they'll drop a few episodes and then make you wait, and then drop a few episodes and make you wait a week. And in some ways, that kind of, if you do it right, you can build that tension in the way that we used to have. But you have to properly build that tension, or it's just frustrating and people will be like, well, I'm just going to wait until they're all out.
And I'm just going to propose this to any of the listening audience seeking a doctoral thesis. I think there should be a study as to what we're talking about. Like, are our patients dropping, or, you know, is there more commitment or a more beloved sense towards the product and the experience when you had to wait for it versus when you can just do it all? Because that's the other thing I've noticed. Like, you'll see things that you were looking forward to. I should say me. I was looking forward to seeing, and I watch it, and it didn't stick with me as long. Where there would be a time where I have a perfect example. A long time ago, I watched a French film, and I mean years and years ago, called City of Lost Children, and I could not stop thinking about it for weeks. It was just the images and the storytelling. It was just amazing. That happens less now. But I will say this as just sort of, if you have not yet seen Turning Red, a lot of love for Toronto in that. I say people should watch it. It's great.
I haven't. It's on my list, and I'm 100% going to watch it.
It's just,
yeah. I wanted to ask you about stage combat and how you first started. What was your first exposure to it, and when did you decide that you were going to learn to be a fight director and start teaching it? How did that all come together?
Well, I guess my first real experience was at university. So there had been minor little things I would have done because I was acting as a kid growing up in Ottawa, and it was, you know, all amateur stuff or school stuff, right? I wasn't you know, a found child actor with a huge career behind me or anything like that, but I really liked it, and in a very real way, I just followed my muse and went to York University and came out of I graduated with BFA honors, and I came out as an actor. And while there, we took stage combat. And I graduated in 91, and it wasn't a great time to come out of school, meaning that there was work, but the world didn't seem flush, right? And I realized I did not want to wait for the phone to ring. So I started, but we're talking card table start of Rapier Wit. And I thought I was going to do some comedy, hence the Rapier Wit, and I would do a little fighting, and I was doing writing because I'm writing now as well, but I was writing at the time. And in a very real way, it was a calling in that it found me. I would be attached to projects like really small shows for the Fringe, or you know, we're doing, you know, backroom theater, you know, small stuff, and lots of Shakespeare because it's free, you know, and therefore there were a lot of fights, and despite the fact that I came out of school with other people all trained the same way, I think people really liked how I treated them when creating fights. They liked the stories I created and the creativity I brought to character meeting violence, meeting the story and progressing story. And I found myself doing more and more of it. And then in 93, the person who taught me at York was Bob Seal, and JP Fournier, who's out west, decided they were going to start Fight Directors Canada. And I was asked with a small handful of people to be the first class at the time, what was advanced. Things have changed and grown a lot since then, because we really were inventing it on the fly, meaning all of us, like, and all of us who participated in the creation of this thing called Fight Directors Canada. But it helped me a lot, because I was at that point working on what I had learned, was very much self-taught. I had a fantastic friend, Simon Fawn, who presently is now in BC, and he's a fight master. He's amazing, and so I worked with him and another excellent friend, Mark Huseman. So I had really excellent people who were peer teaching with me to allow me to grow. But it's like all things, like going to university, as an example, is an opportunity to do a ton of stuff all at once. That's what FDC did for me, where I got to meet a lot of people, and not so much. Often learning is not so much about picking up other people's work, which is true as well, but more importantly, seeing what is you and what isn't you. Does that make sense? Right?
Yeah, it does.
And so there was a ton of stuff that I took and went, this is really neat, and other people do it well, and I'm proud of them, but it's not me, right? Other things like, wow, I really see, I think, clearly what this is and how we should approach it, and other people are having challenges with it. I think we'll do that. So an example is I really like what we call found weapon or environmental weapon, where you're using mundane objects in scenes where frequently normal people lose their minds and go violent, right? As opposed to classic fight scenes, Hal and Hotspur, let's say, or in Romeo, the various fights that are clearly fight set pieces that are important for the story. And also it married to my pleasure at creating, writing and creating the whole entire scene about it. Because in a very real way, I also was directing, right? Not just fight directing, but directing. So as this progressed, I really bit the bullet in, I want to say 96. Basically, I moved into what could laughably call a studio, which meant like it was really small. But I had a space now, because otherwise I was going into church basements and back rooms in schools and going wherever people would hire me. But this would allow me to start planning, and then my next studio was double the size, and that allowed a lot more growth. And in that place, I really was teaching in a way that I started feeling good about and thinking I was helping people. Where the first point I was like figuring out what was my voice, right, as a teacher, and then the best thing in the world to ever happen to me was running into a friend of mine from school named Kirsten, who I knew from university, who had gone to Japan for 5 years, came back, and completely surprised the two of us, started dating, and now we're married. Boom. And she really helped me progress to the studio we're in now. We moved into just a much better space. And she brought a professionalism to the office that I simply was unable to do, because I had so many balls in the air, and quite frankly, she was so good at finding that quality, and so I really have to give credit where credit is due. And it also, by this point, I had taught so many people that I now had co-teachers I could hire, and the day of being the sole person in the room was gone, and it was fantastic. And the whole world kept growing, which was really neat. And that's how I found myself here. So at risk of like saying the thing that, as everyone always says, I am standing on the shoulder of giants, and it's my peers who make me great. And I have a community. And I will say this, going back to what we were talking about with COVID, the single most painful thing wasn't the loss of income, wasn't that horrible artist question that we all have, like, is this my last thing I'll ever work on? Am I no longer wanted? You know what I mean? No, the single most painful thing was the nourishment you get from watching your peer artists create amazing things that you could never have imagined, and you being able to participate in that was like losing a limb. Which sounds extreme, but I realized how much of my social life was part of my business life. And And not being near these really creative, intelligent, engaging people was really hard. And the irony, I would say, is if you asked, I think I'm more of an introvert. How about this? I'm a very successful introvert. I play an extrovert, but it was, on one hand, COVID has allowed me, unfortunately, to really lean into all my bad habits, staying in, not doing the things I should be doing, kind of thing. But I also realized that despite the fact when I'm teaching or fight directing, I'm using performance energy and therefore am exhausted at the end of whatever that is, I really missed it. And seeing people again, it's more than one person. When we finally saw each other in the studio, in the space, a crushing hug, because they were, and tears, like this sounds so over the top. I know it's like, you did not survive the sinking of the Titanic, right? But we lost something, and I'm hoping we have found it again. And it has been a terrible 2 years for a lot of people. I'm not going to claim on myself.
It really has.
But just like, I'm lucky because I have family, and I have Kirsten, and I have a cat who is, if you hear snoring, she's beside me right now. Alice, who is like the perfect life study on how to deal with all sorts of things that I share as a teacher and a director, because she's like she's just always doing something interesting. But the idea that 2 years could just go, it's horrifying. Yeah.
I physically remember, for most of the pandemic, the only person that I hugged or was really in physical contact with was my girlfriend. And I remember distinctly the first person that I hugged that was not my girlfriend, old friend. I saw them. We were all vaccinated finally, and able to be in the same space safely. And being able to hug this person was like, there were tears, because I think a lot of us experienced that. I don't think it's over the top to say so.
No. And then as we were easing into classes, no surprise, I was focusing, like, what we do is so in contact, so physical. I tried doing some sword and spear work and staff work, which gives some distance, but it just wasn't, people weren't on. They weren't ready for it. What I did find people wanting to do and sign up for was, I do firearm training, both getting comfortable holding a gun when firing a blank, because for a lot of people, that's really intimidating and off-putting and uncomfortable. And whether you use blanks or not in a project, knowing what it felt like is useful, like what a gun going bang is versus CG or you simply miming the movement. But on top of it, we have other classes where, like, what are you supposed to look like when you are playing a character that is proficient, if not excellent, at movement of a firearm. And playing video games as an example of seeing these shapes that we're starting to really recognize what is someone supposed to look like versus your instinctual thing that often, sadly, is wrong, right? So, and leaving guns for a side, but like, you watch people, let's say, who've never worked with tools before, and watching someone swing a hammer, you realize, wow, that's actually, it's both instinctive. Most people can kind of get most of the shape right, but watching someone do it well and realize there's actually an art to it, like everything we do. And that goes back to what we were saying before, I guess, about singing, where and acting. I think the vast majority of us can do it, but the people we wish to watch obviously have that extra special something. And that includes the ability to create the look that we need to be able to suspend our disbelief and really participate as audience. Because it's funny, you were talking about things that were terrible to watch. An example, I can't remember what it was, but I'm watching something going, that person is not a lawyer. Or that person is not a doctor. You know what I'm talking about, right? Like, I don't believe for a second someone would put a scalpel in that person's hand. And then it's much worse when you're talking about, that is not someone who can sword fight.
No.
And the cut between the actor who has the right look and is obviously the star and the stunt person who's like super physically proficient, and you're just like, wow, they're not even the same height, you know? like it's so yeah. And so Kirsten, I think
about that, you know, the big duel in The Princess Bride, for example, where the two actors worked for the entire shoot.
Yes.
To look like they were proficient, like really good sword fighters.
And it's why everyone loves that scene, regardless if it is the most complicated or whatever this means, whatever the best fight scene is actually, you know what I mean? But it's just a perfect example of a scene that really speaks to us, right? But do you know the Mystery Science 3000 series of movies things?
Yes.
They're like where the people watch and they basically make fun of the movie, right? Well, I hate to admit it, but despite the fact that I say I love being an audience and just being an audience, that happens too when I get together with some friends and we're just tearing into something that's terrible. But to be fair, we also learn a lot from terrible. And I think, you know what the sin is? This is actually, I'm dying to hear your opinion on this. Things can be fantastic or they can be terrible and still be worth watching. It's the mediocre in the middle that makes me angry that I don't want to watch.
Yes.
Because the terrible is like, it's like jaw-droppingly, I don't know what's going to happen next.
Yes. The thing is, like, with both, for me, if something is that terrible, like, yes, you watch it, you're on the edge of your seat, like, how bad is this going to be? Like, I don't know, like, if it was a staged version of The Room or whatever, and or, you know,
the music,
something like that. But like if you were, when something is mediocre or is just not working, that's when, like, my instinct is just to get so angry, like, especially when there's clearly a lot of money behind it. I'm often like, why is this having this much money behind it? And it's not working. And then I have to sit back and say, okay, so if you're going to sit through this, which obviously you are, your job now is to identify, why is this not working?
Yeah.
What's missing? Why is it not working? Make it constructive.
And it's interesting too, and this is going to happen to everybody who's listening to this, regardless of their age, but you're going to reach a point where it's not so much that you're old enough, but you're experienced enough as an audience member to start recognizing well-used tropes, right? And it's like watching that famous, like, the monster movie thing where, okay, so the person's they open the bathroom mirror, and when they close, there's the monster behind them. Dun, dun, dun. Like, and that's why it's such a gift when you are, in fact, knocked off center by something that's excellent or terrible, right? And it's such a gift, because what we're talking about, I always say that the thing, our goal is so simple as artists, is to create an emotional feeling in the audience, and it could be as simple as getting a laugh, right? And that is a gift. When people aren't engaged, then that's that feeling you were just exactly talking about, where you're just like, you know.
Yeah, I want to throw one of my least favorite tropes that happens in so many movies.
Oh, please.
At you. It's when the best friend is introduced. Best friend of the hero or whatever. And as soon as you see that friend, you're like, well, obviously that guy's the bad guy.
Totally. Yes. 100%.
And then when it happens, they treat it like it's like a revelation. Who could have seen this coming? And the entire audience is like, well, I did, because you made it obvious.
And to make it even worse, even if they've done everything they could to smoke screen it, right? They really pulled every cinematic and writing trick. You're like, that is a well-established character actor, and they haven't given that character actor much to do. Yeah, that's the bad guy.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? So I actually really liked the first Wonder Woman movie, right? Yeah. And spoilers if anyone hasn't seen it. Let's just say the big bad guy, I'm like, I know that has to be the bad guy because he's such a good actor and he hasn't done anything yet in this movie, right? And I knew immediately who the bad guy was going to be because it had to be, right? And you're just like, oh, yeah. Do you know what I mean? It's because
I do.
Yeah,
I do.
It's the reveal, right?
Yeah.
And I can't remember what. There's an interesting movie is it the Calendar Boy? It was from some time ago, and they finally capture the serial killer, and it's no one you've seen in the movie earlier. And the lead actor, literally, the character looks at him and goes, I don't know who this is. Like, they figured out pattern, and they, you know what I mean? They trapped the person, but it wasn't like what we're used to in watching, like the various procedurals where you there's two ways they do it, right? Either the audience is in on the beginning. That was the old style with Quincy and those shows where you watch the murder happen and you're wondering how Columbo was going to figure it out. Then there's the Law and Order thing where you know only what is released by the discovery, the police and the district attorney, right? And so therefore you have a very different moral feeling about solving this crime, right? That you because when you're watching the Quincy one, you know the person's guilty, and you need closure to see them. Where the other one, the Law and Order stuff, especially the old ones, was incredibly, in a good way, dissatisfying watching what you felt with, oh, that person was guilty, but they got away with it. But there was no proof. You never saw them do the crime.
Right.
And I think this is really valuable when I'm approaching what we're trying to create with stage. I know we're not even talking about stage combat. I'm a terrible, terrible person to interview, clearly. But I want, in a good way, to have the audience not confused or to drive them away. But you want them challenged so they feel like they're participants. And it makes some really interesting, on our side, challenges. So, for instance, we, I think, as creators of violence, the illusion of violence, have almost carte blanche to do whatever we wish, provided we do it in a way with the audience's acceptance. Does that make sense? So there are really horrible things that can happen. And if the audience have bought in, they're with you. So, for instance, again, using classic Shakespeare, the murder of Lady Macduff and her children is epically horrible and is clearly there for a reason. And you can portray it either realistically or not show anything. But if you do it realistically, whatever that means, the audience is there because they want to have the outcome where the murderers or Macbeth, who sent the murderers, are punished, let's say. And there's something really amazing actually, I got another one. The movie Alien, when it comes out of the stomach, that at the time when that movie came out, people practically fainted. Like, and now, you know, and now it's like, because we're pushing the envelope as creators all the time. But that monster gets destroyed.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, there's an outcome to that is earned by your like, I want to see this thing punished. Where there's other monster movies where the monster kind of wins and walks away. And it's the sequel machine, right? They want to make all these sequels, you know? And so when I'm creating a scene of violence, I want, in a good way, for the audience to either be rooting for the hero or to be so disgusted with how the villain has gotten away with it, because there's usually more to it, right? Like, the play continues into the event of whatever the outcome's going to be. And it's also okay to leave at the end a sense of complication, that the idea is complicated. So that the play's like, I don't know who was right and who was wrong. The pendulum has been swinging, and this is all excellent stuff. But the audience has to buy into it. If the audience is left, as I said, confused, you've lost them. But if you do something and they're like, that was just gross and gratuitous, again, you'll lose them, right? But it's so interesting that if you have them along the way in a good way, that's what I mean, where you can do almost anything, right? And this, do you follow what I'm saying?
I do, because I think one of the things that the benefits of stage combat on the stage in the theater, as opposed to on screen, is because it is happening in front of an audience. Because the violence is happening and they're in the room, they're like physically in the room. It's not on screen. This isn't something we know has been recorded. We're not separated from it. Polished, that they are more there.
Yeah.
Completely there. I remember years ago I did a production of Macbeth, and I was one of the murderers. And Lady Macduff had a baby. And we we were going to, obviously she knew that played it like she knew she was going to die. She knew her son was going to die, but I took her baby from her and held the baby as though, don't worry, your baby's going to be safe. And I looked her in the eye, and then I gave it a twist, and we had like in the swaddling were like 2 pieces of balsa wood.
Oh.
And the
Horrible.
audience, in a way that an audience
horrible.
wouldn't react on film, they just shudder.
Yeah.
And make an audible noise in a way that people don't when it's filmed violence.
And it's interesting that, right? Because on one hand, film could put the audience's eye within millimeters of the event. Where theater, you really have to fight, if you think about it, to keep the attention where it's needed, right? Because you can look anywhere in theater, right? Like they're inevitably, especially when you have a crowd scene, you can look like, boy, I'll tell you, that servant's super interesting. Look at that servant, So you have to do it really right, I would say one of the challenges, and I've talked about this with my friend Todd Campbell, who's another fight master who works with me and is in Toronto. Listen to me name drop, but the challenge is our perception as audience at what the speed of violence is because of film. We have been trained. The fights are very, very fast indeed. And there are human beings. I've worked with them. I've seen them where the fights live can be very, very fast. However, not everyone can do it. They may do an excellent job. They're not moving because there's lots of tricks in film to make things faster. Editing, taking out every 5th frame when they actually filmed on film, cranking the camera speed. There's all sorts of great tricks for making where you are literally dealing with the sweat and the breath in the space when it's live. I'm with you on that. And I find that super exciting. And if you ever watch a fight live and then watch a recording of that. So for instance, on my YouTube video channel, I have locked camera single shot fights because the idea is to give people an idea of the entire shape. So that future participants can see what's proper stance and movement and stuff. The fights inevitably look a bit slow, but they were much faster when you were in person.
Right.
There's something about the arm's length that a recorded medium does. That's, as I said, a single lock thing really does us a disservice of what we think speed is, and it's a challenge. And so sometimes, Daniel, what fights don't you like? So in a superficial kind of way, I don't like movement that's disengaged from either intent or desire, right? And I don't like things that are fast for fast's sake that don't, because the thing is, we still are human beings, and the performers who are just going as fast as they can be, unless they are remarkable, and they are, and I, like I said, there are some remarkable performers who can do everything you want that fast. But most people are human beings who are like, I don't want to hurt someone, and so all of a sudden, the fight becomes a fight sort of in between the people and not with each other, and it stops being, and again, whatever this means, real. And real is very, very flexible. Like you can have something clowny and you can have something kitchen sink with real, right? But what I mean is it lacks an authenticity that the character means what they're doing, that their intent is there, and that there's a danger to the character. Oh, and that's the other thing. When I was talking about the audience buying in, if for a second the audience thinks in a live performance the performer is going to get hurt or was hurt, you have lost them.
That's the thing. That is the fascinating thing is they will suspend their disbelief up until the point somebody actually gets hurt.
Yeah. And rightly so. Right?
Yes. Yes.
It's interesting. And I talk about this when teaching and directing all the time, is that audiences are not stupid, right? They might not have the training or awareness of what we're doing. So we sometimes have to, this sounds really condescending, I don't mean it to, but like you're educating them into understanding the world you're creating or what this fight means, because you might be using science fiction weapons or things that like they have no knowledge of, right? But they absolutely know what's believable, what isn't, and what's connected and what isn't, right? And there was a period of time, it's happening less now. Well, actually, maybe it's a COVID thing, but there was a period of time where I would get what can only be described as extremely upset phone calls of, please come in and fix our fights. We're opening in a week and we didn't think we needed a fight director or something like that, right? And
Right.
and it was like, you're kidding me, right? You're literally doing, again, Romeo and Juliet. You didn't think you needed a fight director. And I show up,
Right.
and it's like, you're slapping each other or slapping each other's blades, and you're running around the room. And I'm like, why didn't you just kill them there? Their back was to you. Like, what are you doing, right? And of course, I don't actually say it like that because I want them to succeed and I want them to listen to me. And if you make people feel small and stupid, they're not really they're not conducive to your suggestions, right? But my inner voice, right, that is an absolute fucking snob when it comes to what I do in my craft, is appalled, right? And though, you know what, I absolutely have to say this for people who are interested in being fight directors or fight teachers, is something one must always remember is what took you time to get and develop and create. And the people you're meeting, especially who are novices, don't know what you know. And I have certainly seen teachers or directors belittle or abuse the people they're working with because they don't have this inner knowledge that this other person has, and makes them feel dumb. And it never works, right? No. Ever. And it's upsetting. The other thing, how people talk about fake it till you make it, right? And we all bought into it. We all bought into it at the top of our careers. I'm sure people still do. But as I get older, the more I realize that can be very detrimental, because what you might be faking are just bad habits.
Yeah.
Or what you think is the performance quality, technique, whatever you think and all you're doing is a pale reflection or photocopy. That photocopy exercise, I don't know if you've ever done it, where you take an image and you photocopy and photocopy and photocopy. And the idea is you eventually get something that is so away from the original, right? And it happens a lot, right? Where I'm asked to give my feedback on something I haven't worked on, or you know what I mean? Because there's people who want me to make suggestions of how they move forward in their career, stuff like that. And I, as I said, I want to be honest, but also productive and kind, perhaps is a good word to use. But when you're looking at something and you're thinking, I don't think you understand what you're doing. And other people are training with you, or you're directing them, and you're not helping them because you're leading them astray. And this might be coming from a good place. You think you're right. You think and by the way, this sounds incredibly arrogant. I have no doubt there's a bunch of people who know me who their eyes are rolling. Listen to Daniel Levinson, hoity-toity, knows everything. But there are some things I've somewhat learned and understood, and perhaps have a better understanding than others, maybe, right? But there's something very sad, I think, of missed opportunity. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And I talked about really the resource that's finite is time. And it breaks my heart, especially now with COVID, people using time poorly and ending with a result, be it training or a production of art, or whatever it is, and you have this thing that's okay, but it could have been great, but you needed to invest more into it, either your time and or you needed to be humble and allowed other people to help you and listen to them.
Two things that I think people always think they don't need to put a lot of time into until it's too late. One is stage combat.
Always.
And the other is marketing their show. These are the two things that people tend not to think about until it's far too late.
And to be totally fair, the marketing thing is almost none of us are marketers. It's just like
of
producers.
Course.
It's like I entered this profession because I'm a creative. I don't want to produce, even though I have to, all the time. So again, I was saying Kirsten's been such a huge resource, and really, to all intents and purposes, has been my general manager. If I take let's say if my title is artistic director, she's general manager. But when it comes down to it, though, I still have to do the scheduling and figuring out who to hire, and it's exhausting, and I'm not the best at it, except oh my God, I'm just like democracy. I'm the worst at it except for everyone else, kind of thing. No, like someone has to do it, right? And why would anyone produce for somebody else when it's such a tedious, awful experience and there's no money, right, in it? No way to make ends meet. And so I'm not surprised with what you said. But about stage combat, what frustrates me with that is, and again, I'm totally out on a limb here, but I think about our peers in other arts, right? Like, if you're a musician, you work with your instrument every day. And if you're a dancer, all the dancers I know go to classes all the time. And if you're a painter, you paint. If you're a writer, you write. Now, there's people at home, right, going, I wish I could paint and write. I hate myself. Please don't take that from me in a negative way. But actors are one of the few artists I know that, they're making ends meet, and they're bartending or they're waitering, and then it's like, and now I'm ready to play Hamlet,
Right.
And it kills me because obviously there's lots of actors who take training, but let's just say frequently when I'm called in to work on a show, the actors do not have the level of physical training you want to see, right? So they can really run with all aspects of the show. So I'm going to, another name drop. I have friends of mine on the West Coast, Fair of Honor, Jackie Nathania, and they are exceptional in almost everything they put their hands to. And they shame me with how little I deal with physical building of myself, because they walk the walk, they talk the talk, and in building their physical company, their performance company, they really train with their people and put them to a place where they can physically perform what they wish to portray. That is not the norm. Another really excellent peer in Mississauga, Colleen, has Frog in Hand, again, really puts her money where her mouth is, and trains and trains and trains and trains and brings people along and puts them, helps them to a place where they can really capture the quality of movement she's looking for in her dance company. And I get it for my other peers who are actors who, look, I need to make a buck. I don't have money for classes. I get it. But when the time comes and the bell rings and you're going to be playing someone who has a very special set of skills, and has to be able to accomplish these things, it's heartbreaking how often we don't see it. And by the way, it leads to a statement someone once made to me, which made my heart sink, and it's never quite come back. The person said, "Oh, I hate stage combat because it always looks fake." And I looked around the room to the people he was talking about. Nobody in the room had trained, and I was given, I don't know, 4 hours, 6 hours,
right? That
really, really needed 20. Like, we have that statement about for every minute of performance time, it's a mantra, right? Every minute of performance time, you should have 10 hours if you're highly trained, and you need actually 30 if you're learning and training. But no one gives you 30 hours. 30 hours is the entire rehearsal process now for a play,
right?
Practically, right? And I get it, because I'm not a fool, but we're also allowed to be a bit utopian in our passions, in our art, right? And that really was what I think, in a nutshell, why I started Rapier Wit. I wanted a place for people to come and train. COVID, as you know, really knocked the legs out from what we were doing, in that we had drop-ins where people could come in weekly and come in for a couple hours and learn a new skill. or reinvest in a skill they had. And I also, what I loved, Kirsten and I were able to hire all the teachers in town and give them a chance to keep their skills sharp in directing and teaching. And the whole goal was to create a community of people that would help each other shine, right, and grow. And that's the goal going forward. But it's a big world, right? And I know that not everyone has had the time yet to train. And I guess I sound harsh, but it breaks my heart to be in the audience and see someone clearly uncomfortable as a person, not as a character, get through the fight bit so they could get back to the acting, which, if you can't tell, brutally sarcastic on my part, because the fight bit is the most honest part of the character, because you've stripped away all of the social nicety and it's them raw, right?
Yeah. I think that we still do see people who, I mean, I like to think we see it less, but that's probably more the circles that I move in. It's less likely that we see people who are like, oh, we don't need a fight director for this. We're just going to.
I'm hoping that's going away.
Yeah.
Our cousins who do intimacy design have had huge success in getting people to take them seriously and to bring them in. And to, though I'm sure if we were talking to someone at this moment, they'd say, no, they don't give us enough time either. But I'm still struggling to get the time I think needed, because there's the conflict between, like, just, we need them on their feet. They need to work on their lines. We need to get the blocking in, runs, so they can get it working. And then, God help us, we got to do the tech. And it's like, this takes forever, and we have to do entrances and exits and lights. And like, anyone who's never been in the profession, and then is hypercritical, doesn't understand, and this sounds like I'm talking against everything I just said a moment ago, but doesn't understand everything we had to do. So again, with film too. So Kirsten said to me about how sad she feels when people just have the knives out for a show or a movie and really show a lack of awareness or respect for all the stuff they did to get it there. And even if it isn't your cup of tea, because I've seen many things that I can recognize the art in this, even if it doesn't speak to me, right? And I know for a fact there's some movies I really appreciate that other people don't, right? But I'm seeing the craft put into it, maybe, and I've been there, right, where you're like, oh my God, just give me one more minute, okay, it's not going to happen. And I'm not an editor. Like I've put together some videos, some small stuff during COVID, but I'm not an editor. And the painful tooth pulling it took for me to get what I got out, let alone trying to get a much higher quality product, much like you'll get because you're going to do a masterful job on what we're doing, is like, I'm trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, despite the fact what I said about mediocre, right? I
think there's something about the when we are, those moments when they don't give, say, for example, the stage combat the time, and we've all been in those situations because there's not enough time.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. But we also, like, at a certain point, you also knew that you were doing Romeo and Juliet, which has a number of scenes with people waving swords around, which, if you're really respectful of your actors, you know that there is a great potential for somebody to be hurt.
100%. And quite frankly, the audience is going to leave with the memory of the physicality long before, much longer than they have in other aspects of the show frequently, right? And more than once, I've shown up for rehearsal and been told, oh, we're just finishing this one thing. And I'm watching the minutes turn into 20 minutes, a half hour. And I'm like, I really need this time,
Yeah.
And it's I remember a director once telling me that I think you're too, what's the word he used? Not optimistic, but he was like, basically, your fight was too long and too hard. And I appreciate what he was saying, but at the exact same time, we had booked 15 hours for me to work with the actors from training all the way up to polish in the tech. And I had only gotten 6 of those hours.
Right.
Not that I knew that was going to happen, because every time I came in, something would have happened. And so I kept showing up without having actors, or not having the floor, or not having the weapons. And so it was a series of things. But being told that, and also from my side of it, knowing full well, at risk of sounding defensive, the length of fight and the challenge of the fight was appropriate to the show and to the actors in the show. It simply was sabotaged by the reality that the time wasn't given. And also that you knew for a fact, you could tell if you were there with me, that the actors weren't doing their homework either. Right. Going home and working their lines and doing the mental casting of like walking through the fight by yourself. And I remember once having an equity actor tell me, like, well, I'm not being paid for that. Right. Which I understand, but we all do things to prepare for our lives. Right. I remember hearing about someone talking about the argument practice that people often do in the shower when they're going to go ask for a raise, or these things that, we actually do it all the time. And this actor, in a rather dismissive way, saying that to me when I basically told them that they weren't ready. They just weren't where they needed to be. And of course, the worst being that their partner clearly had done it, right? You could see that they had put in extra time. And there was a lot of projection on, well, that guy, he's hard to work with. Yeah. Where it's like, well, he is busting his tail for you.
Yeah. The thing that gets me about that statement, I'm not being paid for that, is that person is likely working on their lines in those hours.
I would think so. I would hope so, because speaking as someone, so I'm very dyslexic. And so I really, when I was working as an actor, and I had to make a choice, right? Like all things, some people do many, many things, but to focus and I think really craft what I wanted to be, I had to make a decision, and I decided to focus on fight directing and instructing. And so I did much less acting, right? But I had to put in the hours. Otherwise, I never would have gotten off book, right? Mm-hmm. And we've all experienced the actor's nightmare. Don't know my lines, don't know what play I'm in, right? And I cannot imagine purposely doing that to yourself.
Right.
Though that's interesting. Have you worked with an actor who insisted things always had to be fresh? So their thinking of acting was always about reacting to spontaneous events. So I'm not talking about improvisation, which is amazing, right? That's something else, or games of improv and stuff like that, or performance improv. I mean, literally, like, they would always change blocking, and of course makes it impossible for fighting, right? And the idea that this is the only way they felt alive as an actor, totally neglecting all the other aspects of what it is to be in a partnership when performing, be it with your other actors or with the audience, right? And it could be a shit show because this person just might not have felt it that night. Have you had that experience? Yeah. Have you been on stage with one of those?
I've absolutely been on stage with one of those people. I've definitely done that. I've also had on the other side of that, where somebody is, I don't know if it's over rehearsed, but there is no spontaneity in anything they do. It's like when it is places, they press play on the tape recorder, and everything is exactly the same as it was the night before. So you find them rigid. They're so rigid, and also like they're not actually reacting to anything. Because acting, it's both. It's like acting and reacting.
And it's one of the reasons why I think we find it so magical, being in it
Yes.
and also being audience, right? And as much as, and I love film and I love television, like I love recorded medium, but there is something so human about the live event. And I think that's one of the reasons why I don't think we're ever going to see the death of live sporting events, live musical events, live theater, because people want to experience that high, that risk of the immediate happening in front of them, right? That's super cool, right? And I remember the Mousetrap in Toronto that was going on and on and on for years.
Yes.
And someone I knew who was in it said there was another person who had been in it for forever, and they would kind of stand on stage mouthing the lines of other actors. Like they were almost like a zombie, right? And it's
right.
It's there's an acting exercise. What's the name of it? Where you basically say a word over and over again until it loses its meaning and then rediscovers its meaning.
Yes.
So this guy was like living his life that way, and that's kooky. That's got to be very kooky.
Yes, absolutely. On the other side of that, I remember hearing a story about somebody who was in the Mousetrap. I don't know if it was the Toronto one or the one in London who've been doing it for so long, but they kind of weren't all there. And so you never really know which part of the show they were going to be in.
Oh my God. How's that for a heart attack?
My God. I don't even like to think about that.
Oh my goodness.
But Dan, we are out of time. I want to thank you for this great conversation. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
It was a huge pleasure. Thank you for having me.